Make sure it works.
Okay, good noonday, everyone. This is Michelle Sutherland, the Director of Prevention Services here at the State Department of Education. So happy that you're joining us for Building Empathy in the Classroom and Beyond. We have a great program for you today. And I bet I have to click on this. What do you bet?
Yeah.
There we go. This is my contact information. I'll have this slide up again at the end, but if you need to get in touch with me, you can email me there. It's better to email than call. I'm able to check my email even when I'm on the road. You probably know I've been on the road pretty much the entire month of February. We are actually doing the crisis team training again tomorrow in Durant, and then we'll do it one more time in June in Oklahoma City. But we've been to 8 locations so far. We've trained hundreds of people, and we're so glad. If you were a participant, we are really glad you came. Here is this URL. Again, I'm going to paste it in the chat box to make sure you have it, where you can just click on it and sign in. Everyone needs to please sign in. Even if you don't need a CEU, this lets me know how many people have attended, and I also send you a participant certificate. So please go ahead and sign in there, and we're going to get started. So building empathy in the classroom and beyond is a topic that I'm pretty passionate about. If you've heard me talk ever, I've generally showed an empathy video by Brene Brown, which is linked on our website. I can't show you videos in this format, but you can go to our training page on the OSDE website under counselors, and you can look at it there. And it just talks about empathy. And I believe, personally, this is Michelle's belief, that if we would all just become more empathetic, then the world's problems would be solved, and we would all get along, and it would be wonderful and fabulous. So let's talk about what that looks like for you. Maybe? There we go. Okay, so let's define empathy first. Empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes and imagining how they would feel, and that is the most basic description of empathy. And I think most people can relate to that. Even our little ones, a lot of them can relate to that. Empathy is feeling with people, not feeling at people. Sympathy is more feeling at people, feeling sorry for people, but feeling with people is trying to imagine something in yourself that helps them connect, that helps you connect with that person. So it's also avoiding the at least. So, for example, if you have a sinus infection, somebody would go, well, at least you can take antibiotics to feel better. Now, does that make you feel better in the moment? No. Feeling with a person might be something like, man, I had a sinus infection recently, and I'm so sorry you feel rotten. I hope you start to feel better really soon. That's the difference. So feeling with people, identifying a connection, and then avoiding at least. So most of this is taken from a writer named Gwen Dewar, who writes for Parenting Science. Several articles are in my reference pages, and on the big ideas, I will actually also put the reference down at the bottom of the page. She has really practical information, and what I did is I took her information and tried to tailor it for educators more than just parents. So the other thing I want to tell you is it might say building a crisis team, but somebody said they linked in and said that the link said building a crisis team. Ignore what it says. I just typed in crisis team. It's building empathy in the classroom and beyond, I promise. That was just a brain malfunction on my part from doing so many crisis team trainings, I'm sure. So I apologize about that. It's actually building empathy and beyond. So sorry about that. So her philosophy and ideas were so good, they can be versatile and used for educators as well, and that's kind of what I've had to do. The other thing is I really want you to participate today as much as possible in the chat window over to the right on your computer screen. There's a lot of theory that I'm going to give you, and I'm really curious to hear some of your practical applications because I know you have some great ideas. So, and then I will share them with everybody as well. So So the big question is, can empathy be taught? And I'm going to give that a resounding yes. There are degrees of empathy. So there are some people who are just naturally not very empathetic. And then there are some people who are empaths, who are just super empathetic. And these are the kids in your counselor office who are upset because of what their friends are going through. They're absorbing something that's probably shouldn't be good for them to absorb. They're the kids who want to fix all the world's problems, and they're the kids who are probably going to make great counselors someday. My guess is if you are a counselor, you're probably an empath. You're probably someone who is significantly more empathetic than the normal person. So this should be something that you can really relate to. And I'm hopeful that what you learned today you can take back to the teachers in your building. So empathy does take practice. It's not something you can just wing, and it's not something that you can just do one time and you've got it figured out. It is something that takes practice. It takes a basic understanding of basic psychology, so you have to understand what empathy is. And some people just normally have to work harder at it than others. And there's nothing really wrong with that, but again, practice does make perfect. It's just like if you're going to play a sport for the first time and you go into it later in life, or maybe you're not a super athlete, maybe it's not easy for you. It is something you can learn. I wasn't always the best athlete growing up, but I worked really hard at it and got to have some accomplishments because of my hard work. And then it became easier for me as I went along. So that's something that's a kind of universal thing. So natural empathy. According to Dewar, one study suggests babies can show empathy, which I thought was really interesting. An experiment by Zahn Wexler confirmed that newborn babies are more likely to cry if they hear recordings of other infants in distress. And normally developing infants begin to show empathetic concern for their family members between ages of 12 and 24 months. That's so super early. So I think that is really interesting that it's something that can be really inherent in babies, but it's also something that can be taught as well. So when you talk about teaching empathy, human empathy involves a whole package of skills and social beliefs. So it's just not like something that you either have or you don't. It's a skill. And it's a belief, and they have to mostly be learned. So a lot of studies have reported a link between parenting practices and empathy in children. So if you are a parent who teaches your child empathy, your child is more likely to be empathetic. And I believe as educators, when we're focusing on empathy, then our kids can be more empathetic. I had someone just comment that their 2-year-old laughs when someone pretends to cry. Well, that's probably because she or he knows that they're pretending. So that's something probably good, is that your 2-year-old is probably aware that they're pretending. So, or maybe, you know, laughter can also be an uncomfortable emotion. When you feel uncomfortable with something, you can laugh. So maybe it's that too. So genetics can also explain some of the differences between people, but there are experiments that demonstrate adults can learn to be more sensitive and responsive. So if grown-ups can learn how to be empathetic, then why can't kids? Well, we know that kids are little sponges, and of course that they can learn that. But empathy can't be taught in one guidance lesson once a year, or even one guidance lesson once a month. It has to be ingrained into everyday practice inside the classroom and everyday practice inside your counselor's office. Empathy should be taught to all ages. It should be taught in all lessons, subjects, and opportunities anytime you can, and as early as possible. So when we talk about addressing a child's needs, we need to teach them, here are the things we're going to talk about. Teaching a child to bounce back. We're going to talk about how feelings influence behavior, seizing everyday opportunities to model sympathetic or empathetic behavior, help children see what they have in common with others, teach the hot-cold empathy gap, which is an interesting concept, help children see the perspective of others, teach children to physically identify with a feeling, which is also an interesting concept, obviously teaching self-control and self-regulation, teach older children about mechanisms of moral disengagement. That's a fancy way to say good kids doing bad things, and inspire good feelings through pleasant social and physical interactions. So Barnett suggested, when we talk about addressing needs and bouncing back, that children develop strong empathy when their own needs are being met, which I think is really interesting. So what that looks like for parents is they should help their children bounce back with problem solving when possible. But this is a great lesson for educators as well. So what does this look like at a school? This means meeting your students' basic needs. I'm going to guess that most of you out there in cyberspace have a snack drawer, or at least some crackers and some maybe little water bottles that you're able to give to your kids. And sometimes meeting the basic need of food and drink is important. I know I've had kids sleep on my couch sometimes when they were up all night for whatever reason in a counselor's office. So I think that meeting those basic needs are really important. When a child fails, encouraging them to try again. So maybe they're failing at how they handle a situation. Maybe they failed at an assignment or a disagreement, something, but encouraging them to bounce back or try it again. The ability to correct mistakes. Now, this can be a controversial topic when it comes to education, whether you should correct mistakes or not. But I'm under the firm belief that grades should represent knowledge, not how well you took a test. And the ability to correct mistakes is very practical. In the real world, which I know a lot of teachers talk about, well, in the real world, that wouldn't happen. Well, yes, it would. We're very rarely in a situation that is a situation where we're not allowed to correct a mistake we made. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't consequences for the mistake we made, but rarely is it a situation when it can't be corrected. So I think that that's a really practical way to help kids have do-overs, essentially. Giving your attention to the child who needs it. This is not easy sometimes because we know that we have needy kids. And they're the ones who are in our office the most, and they're the ones that when we see them sometimes we quickly shut the door and turn off the light and pretend that we're not there. Or maybe they're the ones where we say, well, I can't meet with you right now. My suggestion is if you have a child who is in your office all the time and really causing a problem for how much time they take up, to give them a regular standing time to come in. Not necessarily like an hour-long therapeutic session because we're not therapists, but we know that every Tuesday and Thursday morning you're going to check on them for 15 minutes and send them back to class. You set a timer when they come in and they know that's their time with the counselor and outside of something unusual happening. So, but give that attention to the child who needs it and give them your undivided attention. It's so easy to be sidetracked and to be wanting to multitask because we are multitaskers, but if you can, if it's at all possible, you're going to want to give your full attention to a child who needs it. And then help children with rebuilding impaired relationships. This might be with their peers, and it could be with a family member, or with their teachers. One of my mentors in the education community had a great choice board, essentially, whenever a child had a difficult situation with an adult in a building. He would give the child 4 choices. He would say, here are your options. You can do nothing. You can have me talk to the person by myself. You can have you and me talk to the person together, or you can talk to the person by yourself. And he would let the child choose. I mean, this is great to offer choice, but when you're giving them those choices, you also help them understand, well, you know, the most effective thing is if you go to the person directly. So letting them have that choice, and it's also really empowering to children when you give them the permission and ability to work on a relationship, especially with an adult. Do you all have any other ways that we might address needs or bounce back that's something that you're doing at your school? And if you do, just comment in the chat section and I'll throw it out there for everyone to hear. So that's how we're going to do this for all of the 10 items. So if I'm talking and you think of something that applies, go ahead and add it to the chat box. So I'll be able to read it at the end. So if you have an idea of something that applies, you can just add it in the chat box and I will read it and share it with everyone. Let's talk about feelings that influence behavior. Now we know that this is true from a counselor perspective, but even from a personal perspective, sometimes this is hard to acknowledge or admit that our feelings are going to influence what we do and how we act. So it's important to treat children that they have minds of their own. It's important to talk to children about their emotional states and how they influence actions and behavior. And it's important to talk about how emotions motivate behavior. We had someone tell us, Rebecca had just said in the chat box, that empathy through Second Step SEL program, Unit 2 focuses on empathy. That's really exciting to hear that you're teaching that already. That's a great start. So when we talk about what it looks like at school, what does feelings influencing behavior look like? So when a child behaves a certain way, how did they feel right before they did that? Right before you kicked Bobby in the shin, what feeling did you have? This is easy for children who are naturally empathetic, but it's harder for kids who are not. It's harder for kids who don't necessarily know how they feel on a regular basis, but it's really good. When talking about a character in a story that you're reading of any kind, have a child try to predict their next action. So if you're reading a book to your class, or if you're having you're reading a play, let's say as a group, don't be afraid to stop when you're reading and before you turn the page and say, what do you think is about to happen? What do you think Ginny B. Jones is going to do in this situation? Have kids try to kind of predict based on their feeling, and that way they're going to start linking feelings to behavior. So when correcting a behavior, have the child identify the feeling preceding it, kind of the opposite of that. So, I didn't like how you shouted out in class. So when you did that, how were you feeling right before that? Well, I was feeling frustrated because nobody knew the answer and I did, and you hadn't called on me yet. So having them identify that behavior, and then help students identify their feelings even when it isn't easy or it's uncomfortable. I have 2 boys, one of them's 12, one of them's 15. My 12-year-old can tell you how he feels at any moment of the day, and he will tell you all about how he feels. My 15-year-old is not very comfortable with talking about his feelings, and these 2 have always been like this. So it's not even just their age, but being 15 even more so. So I have to be careful how I word things when I talk to him. Instead of saying, how do you feel about XYZ, I have to say, what do you think about that? He's more readily able to identify his thoughts more than his feelings. So he'll tell me, well, I think that that is an interesting idea because of this. And then I can repeat back to him, so it sounds like you feel this way. So, for example, his soccer team won a game yesterday for the first time in a long time. And instead of saying, how do you feel about that win, I said, what do you think about that win? And he said, well, I think it was really good. It had been a long time coming. And I repeated back to him, well, it sounds like you feel relieved that you finally won a game. He's like, yeah, that's how I feel. So helping translate for kids their thoughts to their feelings is really helpful. Tammy says that she always recommends to her students to talk to others first, but they also do have the option to come to their office with a person as well to work out something. That's a great option. I think anytime that we give kids choices, it's going to be beneficial for all of us. When a kid feels like they have to do something one way, then their heart's kind of not into it. But when it's their idea and their choice, you get more buy-in, obviously. So one thing I did was I looked up just on Google Images, to be honest with you, some just worksheets on empathy, and I've put a few throughout this presentation. So this would be a great guidance lesson that you could do. You could when you just talk about feelings, and you could help kids have the idea that when you felt one way you did these certain things, or that you said these certain things. And this was just a really basic worksheet, but I liked it because I thought it was applicable to a lot of different ages, not just little kids or big kids, but it's applicable. And it's also applicable in one-on-one counseling if you're counseling about a certain situation. And so maybe it's not a cute worksheet that you do, but maybe it's just a conversation that you have. But I really liked this worksheet because I thought it was really universal age-wise. So let's talk about modeling empathy. And y'all are obviously empathetic people, or you wouldn't be counselors. But sometimes we kind of have to go out of our way to model empathy. So talking through your behavior or reaction to a situation that requires empathy. This happened to me yesterday. I was checking out at a store and I used the wrong card and needed to cancel my purchase, and it wasn't a big purchase. There were 3 items, but I needed the checker to cancel it, and I needed to use a different card. Well, she got really mad, and she was young, and she wadded up the receipt and threw it away and rolled her eyes at me, and I was hot. But my son was standing right next to me, and I knew as I started to open my mouth to say something to her, and I thought, my son is watching me. So I waited until I could get control of my emotions, and I looked at him and I said, I think she's having a really bad day. And so I had to model that empathy, even though that wasn't my initial reaction, because I could have said what was on my mind. It wouldn't have probably have been very beneficial to any of us. It might have made me feel better temporarily, but instead I tried to be really intentional about how I acted, and then I explained to him how I acted. I talked him through my thought process, and he could see that she was irritated too. So when we got to the car, I'd say, you know, I was really frustrated with her, but I realized that she was probably having a bad day, and she was really young, and she probably could have canceled my order instead of having to start over, but it all turned out okay. So also talking through how your reaction might make someone else feel. So I actually said to him, man, if I would have said what I was thinking originally, it would have made her have a lot worse day. And it probably would have just slowed things down for us even more. She might not have done it correctly, and I could have been charged twice. I mean, just talking through that whole thing, that modeling empathy is really important. So I love this little worksheet. It kind of gives the definition, and then it gives some sentences, very basic. Haley just got out during the kickball game at recess. How do you think Haley feels, and how can you respond? So you could do this very easily as a group, individually. You could give a worksheet. You could do it in a small group setting. I really like this one. I think it's a really easy way that you could have kids start thinking about empathy all the time. And this can be done as bell work. It can be done for 5 minutes a day where you have one question that you're talking through as a class every day. So looking at school, when you're modeling empathy, you're validating a child's feelings. You're believing a child's story. Even if it's not 100% believable, let them, hearing you say you hear them and you believe them, or that you're really sorry and you understand why they're upset, can make a big difference to a child. They feel very validated. Showing empathy to children and other adults. I mean, don't you guys probably, like me, have that one person that you work with that just drives you crazy? Like, they are always doing something that is not thoughtful, that is tacky or rude, and what you really want to do and say, especially when other people notice around you, is, oh, they're so rude and I just can't stand them and watch what I'm going to do to them. But what if instead you were empathetic even when you didn't feel like it, and you pointed out how you put yourself in the other person's shoes and imagined how they would feel? You could point out when characters show empathy in a story that you're reading, or even in story problems. Like, one idea that I have is, if you're doing a story problem, and I'm not very good at math, but roll with me on this one. I think I'll get this one okay. And you say, Janie has 10 apples and Tommy took 7. How many apples does Janie have left? Well, the answer is Janie has 3 apples left. But what if you added another layer to that and said, well, how do you think Janie felt that Tommy took 7 of her apples? And there could be a lot of answers. Well, maybe Janie is angry that he took her apples. Or maybe Janie realized Tommy was really hungry and she gave him the apples. But just have the kids think through the feelings that are involved with it can be really helpful in all kinds of situations. And then defining empathy for children of all ages. I think it sounds like a fancy word, but it's not. And I think the sooner we talk about empathy, the more knowledgeable and more empathetic our kids will be, which will just in general make the world a better place. Any other ideas about modeling empathy out there? Okay. Now I love this one, the hot-cold empathy gap. And this is a simple way to talk about empathy and feelings. So Dewar says that when people feel cool and collected, it is easy to underestimate how compelling an emotionally or physiologically hot state can be. In other words, the hot-cold empathy gap leads to mistakes in judgment and failed empathy. So the example is, it's hard to appreciate the power of a food craving when you are not hungry. So I can think of a time actually when I was pregnant with my second son before I knew it, and I was craving black olives, like I could not stop eating black olives. And thinking, I like black olives still, and I liked them before, but it's hard for me to remember and understand how there was a time in my life, a day specifically, where I could not stop eating black olives, like to the point it made my stomach hurt. But that power of craving and hunger is a hot state. Now the way I feel about olives is cold, but there is the difference between a hot and a cold state. So what does it look like at school? So you define feeling hot and cold, or maybe you call it cool instead of cold. It's up to you how you want to define it. But when a student is trying to make a decision, you ask a student if they're feeling or felt hot or cold in the situation. So maybe it's at a station, like it's a younger group of kids and they're at blocks. And they're wanting, it's time to move to the next one, but they're not finished building their blocks. And they get mad and they knock somebody else's block tower down. So you could ask them, how did you feel? Were you hot or were you cold in that situation? And hot and cold is something that even babies can understand the difference of. I used to, when I didn't want my child to touch something, I used to say, no, hot, like a Christmas tree. Clearly it was not hot, but I didn't want him to touch it, and so I would tell them it was hot because they understood hot. So the hot-cold empathy gap is something that really anybody can understand. If they are cold in a situation, ask if they can think of a time when they were hot in a similar situation and how it felt differently. So that would be, I can think of an example for myself of a time when I told a lie about something because I was under pressure and was feeling hot, if you will. And if I were in a cold situation or a normal situation, I would never have told this lie, right? But because I was under stress and it was timely and things were happening fast, I was hot and I made a bad choice and I was not very empathetic. So I think kids can really understand that hot-cold empathy gap. Also, it can be used in bullying situations. Dewar has a whole article on the hot-cold empathy gap and on bullying that would be worth reading. It'll be linked to my references. So you can ask the bully if they've ever been teased about something that they themselves cannot change, and have them identify with how that made them feel. So for example, every time I would get a bully into my office, especially a 6th grader when I was counseling middle school, because they were new and they were impressionable and it was the first time I had them. And maybe they didn't think that what they did was bullying, but maybe they were really mean. And I would always try to take the opportunity to say, has anyone ever teased you about something you couldn't change? And I talk about being in 5th grade myself, and I really wanted jams, these shorts that were really popular, but my family didn't have much money, so instead of jams, my mom made me imitation jams, if you will. They were super cute. I could pick the material. They were made with love by my mom, but they were not jams, and I would get teased for having homemade jams. And so I could identify with how people felt when they got teased about something that they couldn't change. So this has almost always worked. I can think of one time when the kid played it too cool, or maybe he was a sociopath, I'm not sure, where they couldn't identify with something. But everybody has something they get teased about, whether it's their height or their weight or their hair color or eye color or skin color or socioeconomic status or what they wear or the way they talk or what classes they take or the way they're not very athletic. I mean, it could be anything. Everybody has something. And when you can help a student think about how they felt in that certain situation, every single time but one, they'd say, yeah, I felt really terrible and I didn't feel worthy or whatever they said. And I said, well, I think that's probably how you made this other person feel. And that they got it at that point. Now, it didn't cure bullying forever, but it made them get it in that situation. And most of the time, whenever I would point that out to them, they would say, oh, I want to apologize. You know, that's not right. I wish I hadn't done that. So it's also helpful to have a child imagine someone in a worse situation than themselves. So this is a good tool for all of us all the time. When we're feeling super stressed or unhappy about something, to imagine somebody who's worse off. I saw this amazing commercial on Facebook of children in a third world country saying things like, I hate it when I forget to bring my charger cord for my iPhone. Or I hate it when I don't get to go to Taco Bell twice in 1 week. Something that's a total first world problem, but these children in a third world country are saying it, and it's so obvious that they're in a third world country, they cannot get a wide shot. It makes you realize how ridiculous it sounds to say something like that. Or it makes me so angry when my kids use all the hot water in my shower in the mornings and I have to take a cold shower. Well, some people are just happy to have clean water, right? So helping students identify people who are in a worse situation than they are is really important, I think, and helping them, I know the saying that I would say, you know, if all of our problems were thrown into a big bag, you'd probably still choose your own because you don't want somebody else's awfulness, right? So does anybody else have any other ideas about that modeling or the hot-cold empathy gap? Okay. Exploring other perspectives is really important, and we kind of talked about some ways that you could do that as well. But Dewar says that when we are discussing questions about others' perspectives, a study showed that discussing emotional content can lead to development of empathy, which is another research that she's citing. And role-playing can be really beneficial. Now, I have some friends who say they hate shower games, and that's kind of what role-playing is, but it can be really, really helpful whenever you're talking about an emotional topic. So what does that look like at school? I really like this idea. In books, articles, videos, textbooks, math story problems, history books, etc., talk about how someone might feel when something happened. So history teachers or social studies teachers can do this at every single lesson they do when they're researching somebody in history or a situation in history. How do you think that person felt when this happened? More than just the facts, not to tell the kids how they felt, but to help the children identify how they felt. Even have them role play it. You could also role play everyday situations, such as lining up to go to lunch. So let's say you're having a race every single day to see who's at the front of the line, and you role play that situation, and you help them understand that it's not really that important to be at the front of the line. Or how does it feel to be at the back of the line? Is it really that big a deal? You could let children use puppets to role play. Or you can let children draw or write how someone is feeling in certain situations. So if you're reading a story, while you're reading the story, you could have a child draw how the person is feeling in the story. Or maybe you read a chapter and then they draw the feelings in that chapter and how those are represented. Another way that they could explore those other perspectives. Any other ideas about exploring perspectives? Okay. So physically identify with emotions. I think this is a really practical thing that we can do, and it can be done in large groups, it can be done in small groups, or it can be done individually. Dewar says when researchers have asked people to imitate certain facial expressions, they have detected a change, not a chance, a change in the brain activity characteristic of identifying emotion. Heart rate changes, body temperature changes, and other aspects can change too, which I think is so fascinating. So I love this little exercise you could do with your kids. So if your shoes could talk, write or draw what your shoes would say if one of your classmates was trying to stand in your shoes. How are you feeling? What did you experience this morning? This is such a cool exercise because not only are you having children identify their feelings, but you're going to probably learn something about them that you didn't know before. I think the whole standing in your shoes, that's a definition of empathy, and you can talk about that. And then you could take turns either sharing, or you could turn to a partner and have them share. You could have them share in a small group. You don't have to have them share at all if you don't want to. Also, I wanted to share with you one of the guidance lessons that I did for 6th graders was I put them in small groups of 4 or 5, and I got the most interesting shoes that I could find, and I put a shoe on each table. So I had like a pair of Chucks, I had combat boots, I had high heels, I had whatever the most popular shoe of the day was, Toms or Snooks or Sperry's or whatever it was. You can kind of tell my age. I had a pair of basketball shoes or soccer shoes. Like I had a different, like an athletic pair of shoes. And what I had the group do was talk about who wore those shoes. So I want you to write down who wore the shoes and what they were like. And it was really interesting because a lot of times, like the heels, they were like, well, this is a snobby girl, or these basketball shoes, they're a stud basketball player, or the combat boots, it's somebody who's emo or whatever. And then what I would do is I would go back and I would give them the background behind the person who wore the shoes, and it would just be somebody I would make up. But for example, the basketball player, it's a kid who tried out for the basketball team for 3 years and finally made it for the first time, and he couldn't afford basketball shoes. But one of his teachers saw that he made the team and was able to get him the shoes that he really wanted because they knew it was that important to him. And was it the person that you thought it was? And every time the answer would be no. So really talking about shoes and using shoes in a guidance lesson and trying to decide who wore them and then give them the real story is just what we see in memes and things every day about, you know, don't assume that you know what somebody else is going through. Be kind. You never know what else they're going through. So it really helped kids and made them think. And I always kept a pair of shoes in my office for that reason. I had them up on a shelf, and everybody would be like, why do you have a pair of shoes on your shelf, Mrs. Sutherland? And I could kind of talk about that, about empathy and walking in somebody else's shoes, and it would open up great conversations to do that. So that was one of my very favorite guidance lessons that I would do. What does it look like at school? Ask a child to make a face of the person you are reading about in a book. So they're reading about a character, and you say, you know, as I read this scene, I want you to make a face based on how you think that person is feeling. And we know that that changes the brain, that they can actually identify with that feeling or emotion. Have a child draw the emotion of a character they're reading about. Or when helping a child reflect on how someone else feels, have them make the face that the other person might be making. just something as simple as that kind of physical identification can really be helpful. Any other ideas on physically identifying your emotions? Okay. So I know this is a little bit hard to read, but this says, your task is to pay attention to the images and the lyrics of the song, whatever the song is. You need to empathize with the victim of the Holocaust by writing down how they may be feeling. So you can use it in a social studies lesson. What are they thinking? How do they feel? What do they see? How do they touch? Kind of identify with those basic senses can be a really helpful thing, even in a advanced history class. So self-regulation and self-control. Man, I was telling somebody, if we could teach self-regulation and self-control as like a magic bullet, then we'd be rich. We'd be rich, because that's what everybody wants to know, how to teach that. So it is really important when you're talking about empathy and helping students self-regulate and control themselves. So some research, according to Dewar, is while material words can have their place, research shows that children are less likely to help others if they're given rewards for doing so, which I think is pretty interesting. So the rules should be based in morality, not arbitrary rules with heavy-handed punishments. And you should be able to talk about how doing wrong affects others. So what does this look like at school? Create class rules or lessons together. Have rules based on what is right for other people. So maybe not just what is right for you, but what is right for everybody else. Talk about how others are affected when rules are broken. Have punishments that fit the crime. So restitution is popular. It's really making a comeback. So for example, a restitution might be that if somebody writes on a desk instead of with a magic marker, that might be vandalism according to your school policy, but instead of suspending them 3 days for vandalism, you have them clean that desk and then every desk in the classroom. Point out when a student might need a break to regulate his or her emotions. So you see a kiddo escalating and you're like, okay, I can see that this child is escalating. Maybe he's feeling hot and he needs a break. And maybe that break looks like walking to the water fountain and getting a drink, delivering a note to another teacher that maybe it doesn't even mean anything. Maybe the note says, Tommy needed a break, so I'm having him deliver this note to you. It could be many different things. It could be deep breathing. There's some great breathing techniques that you can do that nobody even knows when you're doing them. So that's a great thing that you could do. And regulating his or her body temperature first, or his hunger or her thirst, all things that are really important because kids cannot control a lot, and so regulating that for them is pretty important. I had somebody message me, and I'm just going to read you what they said. She said, I do a lesson that is over several weeks on emotions. The students have a blank face of whatever emotion we are covering for the lesson, and they draw their face that they identify with that feeling. She said, we will also do a quick emotional game, and I will say an emotion, and they have to show me in their face. So mad, sad, happy, excited, etc. The students keep the different emotion faces, and then they color, and then they show me what emotion they are feeling for that day when I come in for the next lesson. That's a great idea. And just kind of piggybacking on that, wouldn't it be cool if kids put that emotion on their desk at the beginning of the day so the teacher could walk around and maybe the emotion is anger, and the teacher knows before the kid ever opens their mouth that they're feeling angry today, or tired, or happy, or whatever it is, but they just have something they put on their desk for the teacher to walk by and see. Okay. So here's another great little worksheet that I liked. So you've got your brain, and you can decide whatever the situation is. So maybe the situation is missing the bus. And that's maybe this something that this kid keeps missing the bus. And you're like, please stop missing the bus, because then we all have to stay at school until 5:30 when your parent can come get you, right? So maybe you have them write down, what are you thinking, seeing, feeling, and doing, and then what are some ideas to fix it? So it could be, I'm thinking that I really want to spend more time with my friends. I'm seeing that the line isn't very long in the concession stand after school, and so it's a good time for me to go. I'm feeling really hungry. I am trying to get through the line as quickly as I can, but I'm not making it. So then that you generate some ideas together. Well, maybe if I gave you some crackers, you could eat them on the bus or in the line waiting for the bus. Or maybe you get to leave class 2 minutes early on every Friday to go to the concession stand, so you'll be first in line and not miss the bus. It's just a way that you can come up with some ideas and talk about the situation and help remediate the situation. So moral disengagement. It's a fancy word, but it's not that fancy of a concept. It's the process by which people convince themselves that bad behavior is morally acceptable. So research from an experiment shows that an average, well-adjusted person can be persuaded to harm somebody else as long as they're provided with the right rationale. So there is this experiment done in 1963 where there was an electric shock experiment, although really no electric shocks were administered. So there was a person in a room hooked up to a bunch of wires, and then a person behind the glass that was pressing a button to administer the electric shock, although that didn't really happen. The person behind the glass hooked up to the wires would act like they were getting a shock. So it was a painful thing for them to happen, but the people giving the shock kept doing it because there was a person in a white lab coat telling them that they needed to do it, and so they were encouraged to do that. So, gosh, we see this all the time in our schools, moral disengagement. So we've got to talk about when a good kid could be talked into doing something wrong, and we cannot just focus on the kids who are making mistakes all the time. We have to be able to talk to all of our kids about what to do in that situation, giving them real-life examples and defining morality. So here's my example for you. My son had this friend who was kind of a naughty kid. The kid was a big-time risk taker. He made bad choices at school, and my son just really wanted to be his friend. And every time my son would spend time with him, my son would end up doing things that he probably would not have done had he been alone. So we had to talk about what that looked like. And I finally just said, look, he's going to be the kid who gets you in big trouble sometime, because he's going to do something, ask you to do something, and you're going to want to do it so you don't look uncool, and you're going to do it and get caught and be in big trouble. So what I would say to my son, what I was really afraid of is, I mean, this kid is going to like get you to his house and say, you want to see my dad's gun, or do you want my dad's beer, or something like that. And so I had to help my son process through what his words would be in response to that. And that's so important that we help build that vocabulary for kids when they're going through something. When they're under peer pressure, we have to give them permission, first of all, to say no, and then we have to have them think through what they're going to say in that situation. Just saw something on Facebook about a family who came up with texting an X. So if a kid was at a sleepover or at a friend's house and felt uncomfortable, they would just send the letter X to their parent, and a few minutes later the parent would call and say, hey, something's come up, I've got to come get you right now, I'll tell you when I pick you up. Totally takes the kid off the hook. They just text an X, and the family knows. So having a plan ahead of time for when you're put in a situation where you could make a bad choice is really, really important, and it's important that we help our kids think through those things. So Anybody have any ideas about that? Anything that you're doing in your schools that deals with moral disengagement? Okay. So the last one is inspire good feelings. I like this one. This is something I'm up for. According to Dewar, one experiment shows that a higher level of oxytocin can help people better decode the emotional meaning behind facial expressions. So oxytocin is released when people experience pleasant touch and or pleasant social interactions. So it is the thing that makes you feel good. And like when people get a massage, they have more oxytocin released. Or for me, it's when I get a pedicure or a hug. So an experiment was done with a bunch of men who were given lots of hugs and positive affirming touch, and they were more likely to find the emotional meaning behind a facial expression than they were before that happened, which I thought was really interesting. So what does this look like at school? So develop opportunities for students to release oxytocin. I just went to a meeting today where we started with tell me your name and something positive happening in your life. And we all got to talk about something positive. Some people talked about work-related things, and some people talked about personal-related things. And people started to make connections with each other. I made a connection with another person that I don't know very well because her child plays soccer like mine. So we instantly made this connection, and that's just a little bit of oxytocin that got released into my body at that point. So we talk about recognizing feelings in others and teach about what happens to your body when something pleasant happens. So you're talking about those oxytocin and those feelings. So we know that when oxytocin is released, we're going to be better at being empathetic. So giving those opportunities is a really good thing. This might be letting students talk during lunch at lunchtime, or letting students spend time with their friends. I know that when we have a crisis, we should always have a care station that opens after a crisis where students can come and talk to each other and with trained counselors, and that is something that can help them feel better, just being with their friends or people that they care about. I was on a long car ride yesterday with two 15-year-old boys, and I was asking them, what do you love to do? Like, what are you the most passionate about in your life? What is it that you really want? And one of them said, I just want to be with my friends. Like, I like to do several things, but as long as I'm with my friends, that is what makes me the happiest. So all those opportunities are things that people can have oxytocin released. For me too, I'm definitely a hugger, but I always get permission before I give a hug. Sometimes I have standing permission with some kids, or maybe it's a touch on the elbow or a pat on the back or a rub on the shoulder, whatever is okay and not going to make anybody feel uncomfortable, and whatever is appropriate, I can do that because I know that's going to be a level of oxytocin that's released with these kids, and it will help them become more empathetic. Any other ideas about that? Okay. Well, I will have my presentation linked on our website. I need to do some updating of that website as well, and so that'll happen in the next couple of days, and I will get you your CEUs and your participation certificate. These are my references. And if you did not sign in at the beginning, here is where you need to go to sign in, and I'm going to put it in the chat box again. So you have it where you can just click on it. Maybe, oh there. Do you all have any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts? I had somebody say, I've always said it's not the worst thing to make a mistake, but it's the worst to not learn from the mistake. What a great thing to say to our students. That's absolutely true. Any other questions or comments? Any concerns? Can you email the PowerPoint? The PowerPoint's too big for me to email, but I will share with you the printout of my PowerPoint where you will have the notes, where you'll have all the references and all the information. So yes, I will have those available to you. And this also will be online. This actual live webinar has been recorded, and so we'll have access to it online where you can actually watch it again if you need to, or show it at a staff meeting or some other time that you can use it. It'll be linked to our website as well. Any other questions, comments at all? Well, can't get the URL to work to register. Okay, try cut and pasting it in your browser and see if that works. I know some people have gotten it to work, so you guys are going to have April off from webinars because there's something that you're doing in April, and I'm not sure. Just kidding, it's testing. So I know that that's going to be on your mind the rest of this month and all of April, but we're going to have 2 webinars in May to make up for that. So really excited and happy that you're going to be having to do testing. Aren't you excited? Because that's what counselors went to school for, right? Just kidding. I'm really glad you guys tuned in today, and if there's anything that I can do to help you, I'm going to put my contact information up there again. You can always email me or call me. Again, calling is hard. You can email me. Carol, you can email me and I will send you that information. So there's my email address. Email me and I will send you the participation certificate in the CEU. So, okay, you guys were awesome as usual, and I'm really happy that we got to do this today, and I will check in with you guys in May. So have a great rest of your Monday and a rest of your March.